People always ask me what the worst day at Sandborne was. They expect me to say a fire or a storm or the year the river came up over the lower lawns and we lost the rose beds. And those were bad, I won't lie. But the worst day didn't have any of that. No smoke, no flood. Just a quiet October afternoon, the kind where you'd swear nothing in the world could go wrong. That's usually how it goes, isn't it? The bad days don't announce themselves. My name is Penhale. I've kept the south gate of Sandborne Palace for 31 years, which means I've opened it for 3 kings, one of whom I won't speak ill of and 2 of whom I will, given enough cider. I've seen weddings and funerals through that gate. I've seen a prince learn to ride a bicycle on the gravel and skin both his knees and laugh about it. I've seen things that made the papers and a great many more that did not. But I'd never seen what I saw that afternoon, and I've never quite been able to put it down since. So let me tell it to you properly, from the start, the way it happened. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were delivery day, and the kitchen vans came rattling up the service road around 2, and I had to keep waving them through while the tourists pressed up against the railings to get their photographs. We let visitors onto the front courtyard back then, you see. Not the whole palace. Mind, just the gravel forecourt where the changing of the guard happened and the long avenue of limes that ran up to it. Rope barriers. A few of my lads keeping order. Nothing fancy. The weather that day was soft. That's the only word for it. One of those late autumn afternoons where the sun comes through thin and gold, and the air smells of wet leaves and wood smoke from the village beyond the wall. There was a bit of a crowd, maybe 200 souls, mostly families. School holidays had just started. I remember a little girl in a red coat who kept asking her mum if the horses were real. They were real, love. Realest thing in this whole place, the horses. And up on the forecourt, standing his post by the east arch, was Aldous Carrow. Now I should tell you about Carrow, because the whole thing turns on him. He was young, 23, maybe 24. Tall lad, the kind that fills a uniform out properly. He'd been on the guard about 2 years and he was good at it, better than good. The thing about standing post is that anybody can stand still for 10 minutes, standing still for 2 hours in the cold while a crowd of strangers waves and shouts and tries to make you flinch. That takes something most people haven't got. Carrow had it. I watched tourists do everything to him, pull faces, sing songs. One fellow brought a trumpet, God knows why. Carrow never moved, never blinked hardly. You'd think you were looking at a statue somebody had dressed up. But here's what nobody else knew about Carrow, and what I only knew because I'd shared a pot of tea with him more mornings than I can count. He'd grown up in an orphanage out past Greywater. No family, came up hard. And he had this thing about children, he couldn't stand to see one frightened. Couldn't stand it. He told me once, very quiet, that the only thing he'd ever wanted as a boy was for one grown person to stand between him and the bad things and say, not while I'm here. Nobody ever had. So he decided, he said, that he'd be that for somebody else if he ever got the chance. I thought it was a sweet thing to say. The kind of thing young men say. I didn't think much more about it. I should have. Around 2:30, the royal cars came back. You learn the sound of them after 30 years. The crowd didn't know what it was, but I did, that low purr coming up the avenue and the crunch of good tires on raked gravel. Princess Sabine's car first, then a second one behind. You'll want to know about Princess Sabine, so let me try. She was the king's elder sister, older than him by 4 years, and everyone at Sandborne knew, though nobody said it out loud, that she'd have made the better monarch of the 2. She wasn't soft. She wasn't cold either. That's the mistake people made about her. They saw the straight back and the flat voice and the way she looked at you like she was already 3 steps ahead, and they decided she was hard. But I'd seen her sit on the kitchen step at midnight talking a sobbing scullery made through a broken engagement. I'd seen her remember the name of my late wife, years on, and ask after my health by it. How are you keeping, Mr. Penhale? She was the realest person in that palace after the horses. What she did not have any patience for, none, not a thimble's worth, was cruelty dressed up as manners, and the court was full of that, full to the rafters. She got out of the first car herself. Didn't wait for the door to be opened, which always set the footman into a fluster. Plain gray coat. No fuss. And then she turned and reached back into the car, and out came the small one. Prince Tomas, 7 years old. Oh, he was a funny little thing, Tomas. Serious as a judge most of the time, and then he'd see something, a beetle, a puddle, anything, and his whole face would crack open with delight. He had this way of holding onto the cuff of whoever he trusted. Not the hand, the cuff. Like he was checking they were still there. He was holding onto Sabine's cuff now as they came up the steps, and I remember thinking, that's a child who feels safe. You can always tell. Behind them, from the second car, came Lady Verena. Now, I have tried over the years to be fair about Lady Verena. My daughter says I never manage it, and she's probably right. Verena had married into the family the spring before. She was the new wife of the king's younger cousin, a man named Lord Hale, who was pleasant and weak in roughly equal measure. And Verena was, how do I put it, ambitious is the polite word. She'd come up from a minor house, and she'd married well, and she had every intention of climbing higher, and she had the kind of beauty that makes people forgive a great deal until, one day, they suddenly don't. She did not like Prince Tomas. I want to be careful here because it sounds petty when you say it like that. A grown woman not liking a small boy. But it wasn't pettiness, it was strategy, cold as a fishmonger's slab. You see, Tomas's father had died 2 winters before. The boy was being raised at court under his aunt's eye, and there was a great deal of quiet talk about settlements and titles and what would come to the child when he was grown. Verena had her own ambitions for her own future children, and a small, well-loved, well-protected prince was, to her way of thinking, simply in the way. She never said so, she was far too clever for that. What she did instead was small things. A word here, a correction there, stand up straight, Tomas. Don't slouch, Tomas. Children should be seen and not heard, Tomas. All of it perfectly defensible, all of it taken one piece at a time, nothing at all. But I'd watched her do it for months from my gate, and I'd watched that little boy get quieter and quieter when she was near, watched him stop reaching for cuffs. And I'll tell you something, that's the thing about cruelty done cleverly. It never leaves a mark you can point to. It just leaves a child who used to laugh, who doesn't anymore. Sabine had seen it too, I'm sure of that now. But Sabine was a woman who moved when she had something solid, not before. She was waiting. Watching, same as me, waiting for Verena to do something out in the open. That Thursday afternoon, Verena obliged. It started over nothing, the way these things do. The 3 of them came up onto the forecourt, Sabine, the boy, and Verena trailing behind. There was to be some small ceremony that afternoon, a presentation of medals to the household staff, and the family had come out to be seen on the steps. The crowd at the railings perked up. Cameras came out. You could hear the murmur run through them, look, look, the princess and the little one. Carrow was at his post, not 15 feet from where they stopped. Tomas, being 7, was bored within about a minute and a half. Ceremonies are agony for the young. He'd spotted something. I think it was one of the cats that lived in the stable yard. A fat ginger thing that the whole palace fed on the sly, and he'd let go of his aunt's cuff and drifted a few steps toward the edge of the forecourt to get a look at it. It was nothing. Children do it constantly. He'd not gone 6 feet. But Sabine had turned to speak to the steward of the household, just for a moment, and in that moment Verena saw her chance. She crossed to the boy, quick, and she took him by the upper arm. Not a gentle hand. I was watching, I had a clear line from the gate, and I saw her fingers close on that thin little arm, and I saw the boy's face change. And she bent down to him and she said something low, right into his ear. And whatever it was, it took the color clean out of his face. He tried to pull away, she held on. And here's the part that I still see, plain as day when I close my eyes. She gave him a shake, small, sharp. The kind you could explain away in a heartbeat. Oh, he was about to run into the gravel, I was only steadying him. But I knew what I'd seen. The boy's whole body jerked and his head snapped and his eyes went wide and wet and he made a sound, not a cry. He was too frightened to cry, just a little broken intake of breath. The crowd hadn't noticed. They were looking at the steps, at the bunting, at the medals coming out on their velvet cushions. Sabine still had her back turned, just for that last half second. But Carrow had noticed. I saw it happen in him. I've never forgotten it. He was a statue, like always, eyes front, chin level, and then his eyes moved. Just his eyes. Down and to the side to where that woman had her hand clamped on a frightened child. And I watched something go very still in his face, stiller even than a guardsman's stillness. The kind of still that comes right before a thing breaks. Because you have to understand what the rules were. A guardsman on post does not move, does not speak, does not turn his head, not for fire, not for flood, not for the king himself walking past. There are men whose entire job it is to handle anything that happens, so that the man on post never has to. To break post is the gravest thing a guard can do. Men have been dismissed for less than a flinch. And Carrow knew that. He knew it better than anyone, because the guard was the only family he'd ever had, and he'd worked harder than any man I ever saw to earn his place in it. So he had a choice in that half a second. The same choice we all pretend we get right and mostly don't. He could stand his post, keep his place, keep his family, and tell himself afterward that it wasn't his to interfere with, that it was a private family matter, that a princess was right there, that surely someone else would. Or he could be the thing he'd promised himself, all those years ago in that cold orphanage, that he'd be for somebody if ever he got the chance. I saw his jaw set, I saw his weight shift. And I thought, oh lad, oh no, oh yes. He moved. I'll tell you the rest in a moment, but I want you to sit in that half second with me first, because it's the whole thing, really. It's the whole story right there. We all like to think we do the brave thing. We watch it in films and we feel it swell up in our chests and we think, yes, I'd step in, I wouldn't just stand there. And then life serves us up a quiet October afternoon with the sun coming through thin and gold, and a thing happens that isn't quite our business, and there's a good reason not to move, and a better one, and a third, and most of us find the reasons. Most of us stand our post. I'd stood mine, hadn't I, 31 years at that gate. I'd seen Verena work on that boy for months, and I'd never said a word, because who was I, an old man on a gate, to question a lady of the court? I'd found my reasons too. Carrow was 23 and had everything to lose, and he didn't find a single one. That's the part I can't put down. That's the part I'm telling you about all these years later still. He took his first step off the post. And that's when the whole afternoon came apart. Now, before I go on, I have to tell you what it's like when a guardsman breaks post. Because if you've never seen it, you can't know. It's not loud, that's the strange thing. You'd expect a bang, a shout, something. There's none of that. What there is a wrongness. The way a room goes wrong when a picture's hung crooked and you can't work out why your eye keeps snagging on it. A guard on post is part of the building. He's stone, he's furniture. The crowd looks straight through him. And the second he moves, the second that stone takes a step, it's as if the wall itself has begun to walk. And every animal instinct in 200 people fires at once. The murmuring stopped, just stopped, like someone had pinched out a candle. I saw a woman near the railings put her hand to her mouth. I saw the little girl in the red coat tug her mother's sleeve. 200 faces, all turning the same way at the same moment, the way starlings turn in the sky, and none of them quite knowing yet what they were turning toward. They only knew the stone had moved. Carrow crossed the forecourt in maybe 4 strides. He didn't run. I want to be clear about that because afterward people told it as though he charged, and he didn't. He walked, fast and level and absolutely without hurry, the way a man walks when he has decided something all the way through and there's nothing left in him that's arguing. His boots came down hard on the gravel, crunch, 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 and in that silence it was the loudest thing in the world. Verena heard it. She turned, still with her hand on the boy. And I watched her face do a thing I'll remember till they put me in the ground. First, confusion because a guardsman was approaching her, and guardsmen do not approach anyone ever. That is the whole point of them. Then a flash of that grand offended look she had, the how dare you look, already loading up the words to put a common soldier back in his box. She never got to use them. Because Carrow didn't stop in front of her, he didn't address her at all. He went down, straight down onto one knee on the gravel right beside the boy so that his face came level with the child's, and he put himself there. That's all. He didn't grab the boy back, didn't shove the woman, didn't lay a finger on her. He just knelt down and put his own body in the small space between Lady Verena and Prince Tomas, like a wall, like a held door. And he looked the frightened child dead in the eye, and he said, quiet. But I heard it, the whole front row heard it. The silence carried it. I've got you, not while I'm here. Not while I'm here. The very words, the ones he'd told me over tea, that he'd waited his whole life to hear and never had. He'd gone and made them his own, and now he was giving them away to somebody smaller than himself. I'm not ashamed to tell you my eyes stung. An old man on a gate, stung like onions. For a second, one whole, ringing second, nobody did anything at all. The boy stared at him. Verena stared at him. The crowd held its breath as one creature, and Carrow just stayed there on his knee, steady as a fence post, his hand not on the boy but near him, hovering, an offer rather than a grab. You can come behind me if you want. I'm not going anywhere. Then Verena found her voice, and it was every bit as ugly as I'd feared. How dare you? Low and shaking, but it carried. Do you know who I am? Get back to your post. Get back, this is a family matter, you insolent. And here she said a word I won't repeat to you, a word about where Carrow had come from, about the orphanage, about people like him, the kind of word that tells you everything about a person in one breath. And she reached out and grabbed the boy's arm again to pull him out from behind the guard, to win, because that's what it had become for her in front of all those people, a thing she had to win. Tomas flinched, made that little broken sound again. And Carrow's hand came up. Not to strike. God, no, he never would have. He simply lifted his open hand and held it flat in the air between the boy's arm and the woman's grip. A barrier, a stop, the gesture you'd make to a horse coming on too fast. And he said, still quiet, still without heat, but with something underneath it now that was hard as the cobbles. Madam, take your hand off the prince. Off the prince. He said it like a fact, like a thing that was simply true and was going to stay true. And that single word did more than any shouting could have, because it reminded every soul on that forecourt, Verena most of all, exactly who that small, frightened person was, and exactly what it looked like to have a grown woman's fingers digging into his arm. The cameras were going now. I could hear them, that little chattering of shutters like crickets. 200 people, and I'd reckon half of them had a lens up. Whatever this was, it was being remembered. It was leaving the forecourt and going out into the world, and there'd be no calling it back. Verena understood that, I think, in the same instant I did. I watched it land on her. The color came up her neck in blotches. Her grand offended look cracked right down the middle, and for just a flash underneath it, I saw something I'd never seen on her before. Fear. And that is the precise moment Princess Sabine turned around. I've thought about the timing of it 1,000 times. Whether she'd heard the silence fall and known, the way you know, that something had gone wrong behind your back. Whether she'd caught the boy's little sound on the edge of it, or whether she'd simply finished her sentence with the steward and turned by chance. I'll never know, but I'll tell you this. She turned around and she took in the whole scene in about the time it takes a clock to tick once. The guardsman down on one knee, her nephew white-faced behind him, Verena's hand on the boy's arm and her face all blotched with fury and that other thing underneath. The crowd, the cameras, the terrible, ringing, waiting silence. And I watched Princess Sabine become a different woman. I don't know how else to say it. She'd been standing there in her plain gray coat, a touch tired from the drive, an aunt and a sister doing her family duty on a Thursday afternoon. And then she turned and saw, and something came up through her like cold water rising in a well. Her back, which was always straight, went straighter. Her chin came up. And her face went absolutely, perfectly still, the same still I'd seen come over Carrow before he moved. She did not rush over. That wasn't her way. She crossed, slow, deliberate, every step a sentence, and the crowd parted its attention before her like water before a ship's bow. By the time she'd taken 3 steps, you could have heard a leaf land. She stopped beside the kneeling guard. She did not look at him. She looked at Verena. And she said, in a voice that wasn't loud at all, a voice pitched just for the woman in front of her, and yet somehow heard at the back railings, "Take your hand off my nephew." Same words as the guards, near enough. I've wondered since whether she chose them on purpose, to put herself shoulder to shoulder with him, to say to all those cameras, the soldier and I want the same thing, and the same thing is right. Or whether it just happened that there are only so many ways to say a true thing. Verena's hand came off the boy like she'd touched a stove. What followed I have heard described as a dressing down. It was not. A dressing down is loud. This was quieter than the silence had been, and it was the most frightening thing I ever heard a person do with a voice. Sabine didn't raise it. Not once. She stood there in her gray coat with 200 witnesses and every camera in the kingdom, and she spoke to Lady Verena in a tone you might use to read out a shopping list, and it took that woman apart brick by brick. "You will not touch this child again," she said. "Not his arm, not his shoulder, not a hair of him. You will not speak to him when I am not present. You will not speak of him in this house or any other unless it is to wish him well. Do you understand me?" It wasn't a question. She didn't leave a space for an answer. "I have watched you," Sabine went on, and that sent a jolt through me at my gate, because it told me she'd known all along, the months of it, the small cruelties, the stand-up straight Tomas, all of it she'd seen, and she'd been waiting just as I'd thought. "I have watched you make yourself large by making a 7-year-old boy small. I have watched you do it cleverly so that there was never anything I could put my hand on. You were very clever, Verena." A pause. The smallest, coldest smile I ever saw. "And then you did it in front of the whole world. On gravel. With a soldier 15 feet away who, it turns out, has more honor in him than every titled person on this forecourt combined." I saw Carrow's head come up, just a fraction at that. He was still down on his knee. Still hadn't moved from between the boy and the woman. And I think that was the first he understood he wasn't about to be marched off and dismissed, that the princess wasn't furious at him. "You will leave Sandborne tonight," Sabine said. "You will leave quietly, and you will be grateful that I am letting you leave quietly, because the kindest thing I can do for this family's name is to make sure that the story those cameras carry out of here is not the story of what you are, but the story of what he is." And she tilted her head, just slightly, toward the kneeling guard. "Now step back from my nephew, and do not let me see your face again today." Verena stepped back. She tried, bless her cold heart, she actually tried to gather one last scrap of dignity, to draw herself up and sweep off as though she'd chosen to go. But it doesn't work that, when everyone has seen. She got perhaps 4 steps before her composure went, and the last I saw of her that afternoon she was half running toward the cars with her hand pressed to her mouth, and a footman scrambling to open a door she reached before he did. The crowd did not cheer. I've always been glad of that. It would have been the wrong note, and somehow they knew it. They just let out a breath, 200 people letting out one long breath at once, which is a sound you feel in your chest more than hear. And then Princess Sabine did the thing that I think was the truest measure of her, the thing the cameras almost missed because they were all still pointed at the fleeing Duchess. She turned to the child. But she didn't scoop him up. She didn't fuss. She knew her nephew, you see, knew that being grabbed at, even kindly, even by someone who loved him, was the very last thing in the world that frightened boy could bear in that moment. He'd had enough hands on him for one day. So instead she lowered herself down, a woman of her years, on the cold gravel in her good gray coat, not caring a bit, until she too was at his level. On one knee, the very mirror of the guard, the three of them now in a little triangle there on the stones. And she didn't speak to Tomas first, she spoke to Carrow. "What's your name, soldier?" "Carrow, ma'am," his voice came out rough. "Aldous Carrow." "Mr. Carrow." She looked at him properly then for the first time. "You broke your post." "Yes, ma'am." No excuse, no flinch. He'd known what he was doing when he did it, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise now. "I did." And Princess Sabine looked at this young man kneeling on the gravel, this orphan, this nobody, this stone that had decided to walk, and she said something I have carried with me every day since. "But I'm going to make you wait for it, just a moment." Because little Prince Tomas, who had been standing frozen behind the guard through all of this, white as a sheet, not crying, too frightened still to cry, chose exactly that moment to do the bravest small thing I ever saw a child do. He stepped out from behind Carrow, and he reached out, and he took hold not of his aunt's hand, not of her arm, but of the cuff of Guardsman Carrow's sleeve, two small fingers closing on the wool, checking he was still there. He hadn't done that with anyone in months. I told you that, didn't I? He'd stopped reaching for cuffs. And now here he was, in front of the whole world, reaching for the cuff of a man he'd known for 90 seconds, because in 90 seconds that man had done the one thing nobody had ever done for the boy before. He'd stood between him and the bad thing, and said, "Not while I'm here." Carrow looked down at those two small fingers on his sleeve. And the statue, the stone, the man who never blinked, who tourists with trumpets couldn't crack, the statue's face crumpled, just for a second, the way your face does when something you'd given up hopping for arrives anyway, late, but arrived. He didn't pull his arm away. He held very still, so the boy could hold on. So, what did Princess Sabine say to him? "I made you wait, and I'm sorry, but it's only fair," because she made him wait too. She knelt there on the gravel and she let the silence sit a moment. Let the boy keep his two fingers on the soldier's cuff. Let 200 people watch a child decide he was safe again. And then she said it. "You broke your post," she said again, soft. "Do you know what the punishment is for a guardsman who breaks his post?" "Yes, ma'am," said Carrow. "Dismissal." "That's right," she nodded slowly. "Dismissal. The guard would be quite within its rights to put you out the gate tonight and never let you back through it." A pause. "And do you know what I think of that?" "No, ma'am." And Princess Sabine, kneeling in her good coat on the cold stones, in front of the cameras, in front of the kingdom, said, "I think any post that asks a man to stand still while a child is hurt in front of him is not a post worth keeping. I think you did not break your duty today, Mr. Carrow. I think you are the only one on this forecourt who understood what your duty actually was." She let that land. "The stone has my permission to walk, always, from now on. If you ever again see a child in that kind of trouble and you do not move, that is when you'll answer to me. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am," rough as gravel his voice, crystal. "Good. And then, and this is the bit that undid me completely, the bit I've never managed to tell without stopping for a breath," she reached over. This princess, and she laid her hand very lightly over the two small fingers the boy still had wrapped round the soldier's cuff, just for a second, covering them, the child's hand and the guard's sleeve and her hand over both. The three of them on the gravel, in the thin gold light. And she said, quiet enough that I only just caught it, "Thank you for catching him. Somebody should have long ago." Now, I won't pretend it all came right after that, neat as a parcel. Life isn't a parcel. Lady Verena left that night as she'd been told, quietly. There was a story put about that she'd gone to take the waters somewhere for her health, and the court nodded along the way courts do, and within a season or two she'd faded out of Sandborne altogether, the way a damp patch fades off a wall once you've fixed the leak. I heard she remarried years later into some house far to the south. I hope she was kinder there. I doubt it. People mostly aren't who learn nothing. The photographs went out just as the princess had known they would. There was no stopping them, and she'd not tried. She'd been far cleverer than that. She'd made sure that what those cameras carried out of Sandborne wasn't a scandal but a picture. A young guardsman down on one knee, an open hand held up between a child and harm. That picture ran everywhere. I saw it on the front of papers I'd never heard of, in languages I couldn't read. Somebody painted it eventually. There's a painting of it hangs in Greywater now in the long gallery, and the painter got the light just right, that thin October gold, though he put more drama in Carrow's face than was really there. Carrow's face hadn't been dramatic at all. That was the whole point of it. It had just been certain. People wrote about what it meant. They always do. Some said it was about duty, and some said it was about defying duty, and they argued it back and forth, and I dare say they're arguing still. But I was there at my gate, and I'll tell you what it was about plain. It was about a man who'd been given nothing deciding to be, for somebody else, the one thing he'd never been given himself. That's all, that's the whole of it. Everything else is just people talking. As for the two of them, the boy and the guard, well, Carrow kept his post. Princess Sabine saw to that, and nobody at Sandborne was fool enough to argue with Princess Sabine. He stood the East Arch for years more, statue, still, tourists and trumpets and all. But something had changed, and everyone felt it without quite being able to name it. There's a difference between a man who stands still because he's been ordered to, and a man who stands still because he's chosen what he's standing for. After that Thursday, Carrow was the second kind. You could see it in him. He stood that post like it meant something, because to him, now, it did. And the boy. Oh, the boy. Prince Tomas came back to that forecourt nearly every day after, drove the nannies half mad. He'd slip his minders and trot out to the East Arch and stand there beside the guard, not talking mostly, because you can't talk to a man on post, and Tomas understood that better than most grown-ups did. He'd just stand. Little straight back, chin up, mimicking the way small boys do, standing post beside his soldier. And Carrow never looked down at him, never broke, never gave the slightest sign, except that once, just once, a tourist told me she'd seen the great stone guardsman's hand drift, very slow, very slight, until the back of his glove rested for half a moment against the boy's shoulder, and then go still again, as if it had never moved at all. Not while I'm here. That boy grew up, Shanny. They all do. He grew up straight and kind and a little serious, and the kindness in him, I always thought, the kindness came from knowing, early and for certain, what it feels like to have someone step between you and the world. Once you've had that, you can give it. You can't give what you've never had. That was always Carrow's whole sorrow before that Thursday, and it stopped being his sorrow the moment a small boy reached for his cuff. I'm an old man now, older than I have any right to be. I still keep the south gate, though my knees make a poor show of the steps and the lads do most of the real work and pretend they don't. And people still ask me, sometimes, the visitors who have heard there's an old steward who was there that day, they ask me what the worst day at Sandborne was. And I tell them what I told you at the start. It wasn't a fire. It wasn't the flood that took the roses. It was a soft gold Thursday in October when nothing in the world should have gone wrong, and something did, and I watched it from my gate and did nothing, the way I'd done nothing for months. But then I tell them the other half, which I didn't tell you yet, because I've been saving it. It was also the best day at Sandborne. Because it was the day I learned, too late to be much use but not too late to matter, that the bravest thing a person can do isn't to stand their post. Any fool can stand still. I'd stood still for 31 years. The bravest thing is to know, in the half-second when it counts, exactly when to move, and to pay whatever it costs without counting it first. A boy at an orphanage out past Greywater worked that out before any of us. Worked it out the hard way in the cold with nobody coming. And he carried it, all those years, like a coin in his pocket he was saving for the right thing. And then one Thursday afternoon, with the sun coming through thin and gold and a child in trouble 15 feet away, he spent it. I hope when my half-second comes, and it comes for all of us, sooner or later, the moment that asks us to move or stand still. I hope I remember the sound of those boots on the gravel. I hope I move.